So today I'm going to talk about a topic that is actually quite near and dear to me. It's something that I've been working on for probably like almost 10 years now. And I'll talk about a lot of different things. A lot of this obviously relates to community within the autism and autistic groups. But also how we're doing this, and how things like the pandemic, certain controversies have really affected how this is shaped. You know, uh, it's a very personal experience, I think, for everybody. So what I'm going to talk about here is really my own experience, as somebody who's very much interested in supporting communities. So let's just jump in. All right, we do get some support for this work from a couple of sources. So these are my disclosures. So let me start by talking about the definition of community. This is always a nice thing to do. If you want to get down to the basics of something, you just open up a dictionary and look it up. So the word community is a combination of two words, common and unity. And it really is it can really be anything. So a certain segment of a population, usually what they all have in common is, something, and it could be pretty much, anything. Uh, and these common threads, they can differ and they can be very quite diverse. And I would think, even infinitely diverse. And they could also be separated by, time as well. Uh, I think one important thing to remember is that, even though they are diverse, in their sort of makeup, their characteristics and temporally, they also, change over time. So they are not necessarily, fixed entities. So the word community, which we use sort of every day, it really has like so many different definitions. Um, but the definitions that we sort of remember are really the ones that tend to apply directly to us. So I think that's part of what the trap is that, it can be so much more than what we encounter on a day-to-day basis. Now, I think this is probably something that most people wouldn't argue against, but communities do define human beings. And, it's said that part of being human is sort of needing social connections. So you can see even from way back, in our evolution, we've always existed in communities. Whether it be sort of sharing each other's company, sharing ideas, sharing knowledge, uh, working together as a team to put food on the table. Uh, our survival and our development over time has really been defined by our abilities to form communities and work together, in these communities. But the way that is changing is drastic, a pretty dramatic pace over time. So, contrast this slide to the previous slide. That's probably, how many millions of years are we talking about? But still, people are gathering together, and gathering together in many, many different ways. It can be something as sort of lighthearted as, say, watching a movie together, or maybe going to a yoga class together, or it can be something as intense like healthcare, you're saving lives, or the military, where you're defending a country, or it can be completely based on fun, like going to a sporting event, or based on some principles and ethics, like equal rights, and it can even extend to things that are more unusual, like the Millionaires Club that is going into outer space. But really, the the rule here is that communities are always changing. There's new communities that are forming. Some communities are, phased out, uh, and existing communities are also evolving. And that really is more of the rule and not so much the exception. and I think in the technology age, where we're experiencing a lot of rapid developments in sort of technology, mobile devices, online interactions, this further changes what our communities look like. So in light of the pandemic, we're seeing that these virtual communities are becoming more and more popular. I mean, they were gaining lots of momentum, or were very popular prior to the pandemic. Uh, Platforms like Facebook, Instagram, uh, have been there since for decades. Uh, but how we are connecting, is looking very different. Especially with the pandemic, most of us are have some experience with Zoom. And you know, you may know people or see people on a regular basis, but have never met them, in person. Yet, you're able to share ideas, you're able to achieve goals, you're able to do great things and have a good time, even though, these people are just images on a computer screen. So our connectivity, really is moving from something that is, in person, concrete, to something that's more sort of abstract and more, virtual, more, conceptual. Um, so, the communities are no longer, I mean, we're still doing the old-fashioned stuff, right? But we've got this other option that is pretty much revolutionizing, how people are connecting together and how people, view communities. All right. Excuse me. All right, and that brings me to my own pride and joy here. This is Community Autism Socials at Yale, and we've been doing this since 2014. We've been nurturing a community, and really not just for the short term, but really we really want people to connect, not just now, not during certain acute situations in their life, but also throughout their entire lives, with especially with the new tools and technology. So this community has evolved pretty dramatically, since we started in 2014. It all lives on the meetup.com website, which some of you might know, hosts a lot of sort of special interest groups, anything ranging from, well, this is an autism group, but there's groups on playing board games, or if you're a local pug owner, or there's exercise group, any kind of interest that you have that other people in your area might share. You can set up a group and connect with, sort of build your own community, and connect with those that are interested in the same things. So this is a nice illustration of how we've evolved. So in 2014, we had this cutesy logo with the puzzle pieces. Now, at that time, our audience or our members were primarily, parents. So we had a lot of parents coming in for, sharing, stories, or requiring support or seeking advice. But over time, we evolved this logo, based on our community membership. So, over those years, this community evolved from mainly a sort of parent professional group to more of a group of autistic adults, and clinicians and researchers. So one of the adults advocated to sort of change the logo so that it wouldn't include the puzzle pieces, because not all adults are okay with the puzzle piece. So we changed it to in 2018. And then in 2020, we changed it one more time, because up until then, all of these meetings were 100%, online, not online, but in person. The online part was mainly to communicate messages, to ask people to RSVP. It's sort of a way to just connect people and organize the group. But all of the interactions were in person until 2020, which all went online. And in that situation, we did another change, really moving to a community online and sort of taking out the Yale part, because we didn't want people to think that this was just a community for people living in Connecticut, or Southern Connecticut. So that's the main reason we made that change. But really, everything pretty much was the same, So in a nutshell, this was the description of the group from 2016, and I'll just sort of read off the main points here. But this was something that was always going to be free. When I mean free, it means that we would never, ever have people pay a fee to actually become part of this community or its activities. It was something that was supported mainly by myself and the folks who work with me here. And we use this local online hybrid approach, because we knew that people had a lot of different preferences and how they like to stay connected and how they like to communicate. So we knew a lot of the adults were using the internet to connect with people. So we had to make sure that we had an internet component to it, so we can reach as many people as possible, and tell people what we were doing so they can figure out whether it's a fit for them. Very simple, whatever we do, it's always in the service of trying to make life better. So quality of life is really the main driver of everything we do. And we'll have some examples. I'll talk about some examples later on that illustrate this. Third is having a organic collaborative approach. And what I mean by this is this is not something that is sort of installed or imposed upon people. Really, this approach came from doing some groups the old-fashioned way. For instance, if you would enter a social skills group, you'll have, they're structured, and they're sort of driven by someone teaching someone else social skills, but having tried that, or having tried to run those groups in the past, we found that there weren't a lot of people who really wanted to be there, and because of that, it always felt uncomfortable for everyone else. So we really wanted to build something that people actually wanted to attend, regardless. They would take time out of their schedules to attend, or they'll go out of their way to attend. And we wanted a group to be like that. So it would seem that it was actually for the people and by the people, and that's really what we want long term. Now, in-person meetings for social recreation, we shared a lot of ideas and experiences. It's about sort of enjoying the moment with people. And the online component was more for networking, connecting people. Also helps with curbing some isolation if you live in some areas, where there's less people around you, and promoting diversity. So if you can reach more people, then you can have a more diverse community. So this is some examples of what we did in 2014 to 2020. You can see these are all really in-person activities. They are really surrounded around trying to have a good time. So we've got people hiking. We've got some arts and crafts. We've got some video games. The video game groups are very popular. This is all pre-pandemic, by the way. And we also have these monthly major events. So there's two kinds of events. There are these smaller events that maybe you'd get like less than 10 people, but then you'd have these larger monthly events, which we call galas. And you can see from this picture, they can be themed. We have a Halloween theme going on here. And what we do in those groups is, we have bring some food in, sometimes pizza. If it's around the holidays, we may have some catering from Boston Market. But really it is, sharing some food and then sharing a good time. So these events were first preceded by breaking some bread, and then what we'll do is have like an icebreaker event. And that's what you see here in some of these folks in the costumes. The video game groups, as I mentioned before, were pretty popular. We tried to emulate, the old-fashioned arcades of, the 80s and 90s, and also bring in some really cutting edge or new stuff, like virtual realities. So we have a PlayStation hooked up here with a lot of different virtual reality games. So games that people may not be able to access ordinarily, we wanted to bring in so that people can enjoy them together. This is I believe that is a rock band group. So that was also very popular. You can see this is our winter gathering where we have a Yankee swap led by one of our members. So, that's to give you some flavor of what was been going on during these groups. Now, from about 2014, this is data from our meetup site. We had a steady growth in our membership, and then we added social media via Facebook, mainly Facebook, some Instagram, and that led to a little boost in our membership. I mean, today we have over 1,500 members, so yeah, I always think about the days when this first launched, and being just one of a few people who are in the group, it feels so lonely, but my goodness, over time, it grew to be quite large. Now, this graph shows how many people actually go to the events. So, and this was always been part of the challenge with these kinds of things is that just because you have a lot of people signed up and a lot of people who are going, it doesn't mean all are actually engaged. So, you can see a general trend. I mean, definitely up and down. That as the group grows, you have more people participating, but you can see here that it sort of peaks and then it starts to go back down. And this is prior to the pandemic, so this is like, oh my goodness, this is 2 years now. Time really flies, but you can see where there seems to be an area where you can have a lot of people joining, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to be engaged. So that was a kind of a big problem. So we were trying to figure out, why this was the case. That we have, if you had so many people who were joining, then that your attendees should sort of increase in proportion. But not the case as we're seeing. So what we did was this is a map of the location of our memberships based on zip codes. And this is Connecticut. You see here. Here we are in Southern Connecticut, in New Haven, and you see that it's pretty scattered across the state of Connecticut. But you have to realize that the point from New Haven to say up here, the Quiet Corner, that's like a 2-hour drive. And then if you're coming from Fairfield down here towards New York City, then you hit traffic that ends up probably being at least an hour, sometimes more if you have traffic. So you can see that, if your members are coming from these other parts of the state, that can be a big challenge because not everybody can make it into New Haven, and especially with all of the logistical concerns of parking in the city, and being around a large medical center, it can be pretty intimidating. So we polled our participants and trying to figure out, what are the barriers of their participation. And as we suspected, the number one barrier was issues with transportation. So these groups, they would happen say around 5 o'clock, and not everybody had a driver's license. So then they would have to rely on somebody to drive them there. And if the person that they're asking to drive was at work or coming home from work, it would not be logistically possible for that to happen. And even when they could drive, the stress of driving, was also significant. So, say you're driving from far away, and then you're driving into, one of the major cities in Connecticut, you're going to hit traffic, and it's going to be probably potentially overwhelming. Not only that, when you come into the city, you actually have to find the place. And, it's not like a suburb where things are spread out. It's a urban area. So you've got, well, urban area that's part of a medical center. So you have buildings that are close together. They, look alike. And you got to find the place, find the room, within the building, and that's after you've circled around a few times to try to find parking. And you can see that, there's a lot of thinking ahead that you would need to do in order to sort of physically be at a place at a certain time. So you're doing all this thinking, then, all right, well, how do you know that it's something that you're going to like? What if the people there aren't accepting? You know, what if they're really like judgmental? That you have this anxiety that is, very normal, in my opinion. Anyone who's going to sort of enter into a group, would be, would have some anxiety about it, of, how it's going to go, what the people are going to be like. So that could be a deterrent. And then sensory sensitivities, that's always a big one, whether it's from the driving, whether it's from all the new novel stimuli that you're sort of coming into a new environment. As you're seeing from some of the images, some of these groups can be pretty big, so when they're big like that, they tend to be kind of noisy, there's a lot of things going on. So maybe a bit chaotic. So that can be overwhelming, to the senses, which might be a disincentive to participate. And because of that, you may be motivation is going to be curbed. You're not sure if you're going to benefit. So, you're going to invest all this time and energy, and it may not even work out. You may not even like it. So, you may be want to play it safe and just opt out. Support from family and others. A lot of folks who do end up going in person, they have family members who might go with them, who might help them drive there, who, help them sort of navigate, or, um, the medical campus, or maybe some of the social interactions. Those folks may not always be available, or have time, so now you have to coordinate two people's schedules, or to attend an event. So you can see that, there are a lot of barriers, especially if you're doing things that are in person. So, in the pictures, they look pretty fun, but they're a little misleading in the sense that, yeah, you don't see it's what you don't see, that is causing, a potential problem. When if you are there, if you make it there, and if you have the right supports, then you can see it can be, a pretty fun time. And in general, I think the people who do end up making it, it does end up, for the most part, being a good time. But what about, all the other things that you don't see? The anxiety, the people who may be overwhelmed, people who may be sort of lost along the way, getting there, people who may have like social anxiety, or, lots of ambivalence about these groups, especially based on, they've had some past experience about on groups that, wasn't so positive. There's a big question mark, as to whether or not this is all worth it. So even though in principle, it seems like it's a great idea, right? You've got these events, you've got people who can make it, who are attempting to make it, having a good time, but does this represent all of the community? And I'm going to say no. And even if it did, it's very telling what you see at the events themselves. For instance, you've got the major events, that have a lot going on. These are you can only do these about monthly. So you have these monthly events, they tend to be large, they tend to have a lot of people, it could be potentially overstimulating. But another thing that's not appreciated from the photos is that uh, they can be less personal, and the reason for that is, if you've got a structured event with a lot of people, it could be, I mean, think about it like, you're going to a concert, just because there's a lot of people in one place, doesn't mean that you're really connecting with a bunch of people, you know. It's a bunch of people sort of sharing a common activity, and you think about it as people doing things in parallel within, a big group, you know, and the goal is really to have people not just connect at the group, but we want people to connect, outside the group, and that's really where uh, what we think is important is, it's what happens outside the group, over time that is really important to us. So the major events, you know, superficially they look very nice, and with the minor events, these are smaller discussion groups, uh, less than 10 people. Uh, Often you get these groups and the attendance becomes very inconsistent. So sometimes we may have to cancel a group, because of low attendance. Uh, and these minor groups tend to be more around specific topics, so um, just to give you a couple examples, we had a group that sort of discusses relationships, or a group that goes into like comic books, or groups that talk about various sort of issues that people might be struggling with. These are very much like conversation-based groups, uh, but not everybody is interested in that. So you end up having these groups and really not enough people to have a nice, robust discussion, because the attendance was inconsistent. So, the calendar here, you're looking at, this is part of the meetup calendar. Attendance is looking, I mean, the schedule is pretty sparse. If you're primarily focusing on in-person, and there are sort of limitations, when you are doing in-person events. So we thought that we needed to change, and then when the pandemic came around, it was pretty much clear that we had to make a change. Um, we pretty much went from this uh, all in-person interactions, to uh, virtual interactions using Zoom. And that was to sort of preserve people's safety. And when this happened, we were sort of debating on what we should do about these groups. A lot of places were, closing down, or they're suspending operations. But we knew that this wasn't going to be an option for us, and I like to share this writing by Robert Lee Frost because it really, I think, captures, how we took this approach. So I'll read it out loud. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that made all the difference. So switching from really a completely in person to a completely virtual approach, we knew that this was really going to be our way of keeping people connected, and it really wasn't much of a choice. If people didn't have anything, we knew what the effects would be on people's mental health. Then again, if you just went rogue and said, oh, we're just going to meet anyway, and you can sort of deny the safety issues, but at the same time, you're putting people at risk if you try to meet in person. So, this third alternative, this sort of pivot to distance socializing, really was, we were 100% in with that because it was the best way we thought, we can sort of maintain people in a pandemic and then also protect their physical health. And you can see that, the calendar on the meetups become very much populated in the beginning months. So up here you can see where we're still doing some in-person stuff, I think that these are some of the last in-person events, like in March, before everything shut down, and then end of March and April, you see the calendar becomes filled with stuff, and these are all events that we are offering virtually. So you can see that I think some days there's like almost an event every day, and a lot of days, multiple times a day, we were having some kind of event. So very much a busy schedule. And this slide here, so every time we have an event, we share it on social media. On social media, they want you to have a picture, so we try to choose a picture that maybe represents the event. I think that it makes for a nice collage because it really shows you sort of the the diversity in the things that you can offer uh, when you move to a virtual platform. So I'll just go through some of these here. So we have a self-advocacy group, we have discussion groups of people in work environments, we had a parent group who want to take a time out and sort of vent and talk about things, self-care group for mental health, you had a lunch group, morning coffee group, let's see, ginger ale happy hour, comic book group, let's see, some more self-help, show and tell for kids, discussions on the pandemic, let's see, YouTube sharing. This group here with the pickle, this is people sort of venting about what upsets them and other people supporting them. Cartoon group, this is sort of a life. This compass here represents people who are looking for direction in life. So this is people who feel lost, and they want to talk about what direction they want to go in. This is a self-advocacy group. Let's say an exercise group. Group for women on the spectrum, special interest group with My Little Ponies. I mean, it goes on. I mean, we also have games too. So this is a Pictionary group. There's an icebreaker group. So really, you can see that even though it is constrained to virtual, the great thing about virtual is that it doesn't, in order to offer something in person, there's a lot of things that have to happen. The amount of energy it takes to offer something in person is really large. So you can only offer a few things, but if you make offering these events, if you make the events easier to execute, then what you can, even though it's virtual, what you can do is offer as much variety as you can, using that platform. And this is, sort of exactly what we did early in the pandemic. We're listening to our members and trying to gauge what kind of things, would be meaningful or would be fun for people to do, from Zoom, and we tried a lot of these different ideas, and we ended up having a lot of fun. This is an example of our ginger ale happy hour. So this is a sort of a Friday at 4 p.m. event where we all sort of hop on and we just talk about whatever. And if we don't have things to talk about, then we go through these table topics, which help facilitate the discussion. But you can see that, this isn't one of those things where, oh, everybody is talking equally. So some people, they just like to hang out. They don't necessarily feel like they want to say anything, or they just think that, all right, well, these are my friends, I see them every Friday, and it just feels good to share space with my friends, even though we're in different parts of the state and even the country, it still feels good to spend time with them. And so just because people are in this group doesn't mean everybody is talking up a storm. You've got like a few people who do and a few people who just prefer not to. And they just sort of enjoy being in that virtual space. So the meaning of it really varies depending on the person who's attending. All right, so after offering all of this stuff, we definitely see a spike in our people going to events. So again, this is like 2 years ago. But in response to all of those offerings, we had a big spike in people going to events. May 2020, you can see that it's, oh my goodness, like several fold increase. So it looks very nice. And one thing we realized is that it wasn't sustainable, right? So how often, are you going to, as a professional, can you do this indefinitely? Can you sort of run all of these groups and accommodate for all the growth, and then offer more groups so that the higher numbers of people have something to do? Yeah, well, that certainly wasn't going to work. So we did have several members who are very much excited about this new approach. So they stepped up and wanted to run their own groups, with our support, of course. So, this notion of, teaching someone to fish, really rings true here. These are the groups that were run by members. So we had an exercise group, we had someone doing a book club, we had somebody running an advocacy group, someone running bingo. What is it? This is Name That Tune. This is a work discussion group. This is about sensory sensitivities, and also a group about our group. So this is a forum of, people who are interested in the direction and development of the group. So we would even have a meeting for that, so that we can all share our experiences, and then this is how we learn to continue to improve what we were doing. So yeah, having members, stepping up and actually taking ownership of the platform and running their own groups, through that platform, was one of the ways that we're accommodating for the higher number of folks attending, but also, ultimately that's what you want. I mean, this platform is for, people, for autistic adults or anybody in the autism community, and there's no better way to show that than to have them or have people lead their own groups. So, after all this, you would think, okay, well, the end. Everyone's going to the groups. People are running their own groups. People are engaged in Zoom, and we have our problems solved. And thank goodness that we never have to deal with loneliness and isolation. Obviously, nothing is that easy. So, what you don't see is sort of the data from, say, moving forward as the pandemic sort of went on. What we saw was that there was a drop in people attending the groups. So there was some sort of short-term success, but over time, you saw fewer and fewer and fewer people sort of attending these groups. And the reasons are, I think they're very complex. There's a combination of people trying out something new, feeling that, all right, not feeling it, doesn't really do anything for me. Been there, done that. I'm gonna move on. You also had people who are frustrated with technology. So that was one of the things that was a frequent issue, when we're doing these virtual things, is that especially in the beginning, the tech was, it worked pretty good, but not consistently good, so, and I think we all have this experience with the tech, is that, people get frozen on Zoom, the audio drops out, there's a new set of rules you have to learn, so, maybe not everyone knows to mute their microphones, unless they're talking. So it's a big change, and not everybody is up for that, or, can tolerate that, and they may try it, and it's great that they try it, but never fully understand how to use it, or to the extent that they're consistently deriving benefits from it. And there's also this phenomenon, Zoom fatigue. I mean, some folks are, at least this is what we heard from our parents, that they're between the stuff they have to do in school for their work, they don't want another Zoom meeting to attend. It's just it becomes leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. After it's being sort of used excessively. So people are experiencing, just sort of burnout from being on Zoom and being on video conferences the whole time. Um, but there's still other things, and I think the next chapter really is all right. People can use this, but there's still challenges to address. And what are those challenges? And how do we address them? And how do we use technology to help overcome them? So, it wasn't that, all right, the groups didn't work, we've got to move on, but we got to figure out why they didn't work as well as we wanted them to, and what we would need to adjust. This day and age, you end up adjusting just about everything. At the rate things are changing and how you're learning about things, it's constant adjustment. So that is a new pattern or new chapter. So part of understanding this is taking maybe a closer look at how individuals experience sort of their lives. So in a group, you want people. I guess people join groups because they have something in common. As we said in those definitions, but they're relating to each other in a way that makes each other feel good, right? Or maybe feel validated. And some of that is deriving sort of a shared experience. So and that really determines that is really the details of your lives. So unlike say neurotypical populations, where everyone's different obviously, but say the range of differences may be more limited, so that you may have more in common with neurotypicals can have more common with other neurotypicals. And this sort of illustrates um, these experiential threads of how, say, a neurotypical person, might experience, their lives. This is really just a tool for illustrating a point, not really based on any hard data, but it's more intuitive. You have on the y-axis here, your general feelings. Right in the middle, you're feeling okay, and then there's times where you're feeling really good, times where you're feeling really distressed. And then you have these sort of common events, of everyday life. Growing up from, say, when you're born to when you get married. In this example, everybody's different. So this is just some random selection of how maybe a neurotypical person might experience these common life events. So definitely life, as we all say to ourselves and kids. There's lots of ups and downs, but as you can see overall, people are feeling generally pretty good. So you're either okay or experiencing some degree of satisfaction, uh, and sometimes it gets bad and you feel the exact opposite. Uh, so everyone's different, but say that for neurotypical folks, this graph, has maybe less variability. So the specifics may be different, but there's a lot of overlap. Now, what if you have um, autism, or you have some differences in your social communication and your interests and behaviors? How is that going to then influence uh, your life experience? Say this is not a common, but we'll say one example, of someone who may be neurodivergent. So somebody who, is born with a brain that is, say, significantly different from the average Joe or Jane. And then we can do this activity of mapping out what the experience is like. I think, again, this is just example for purposes of illustration. Uh, but you can conceptually, you can see that, all right, if you're at birth, if your brain is a lot different from most, then your experience of life may be a lot different from most, and if everybody else is sort of using one operating system, and then you come in using a different operating system, then there's going to be some challenges. In fact, there may be more challenges, because what you are perceiving and experiencing, you know, is always or seems at odds, with most of the people around you. Uh, so you may see more conflict, right? Things that were stressful become extraordinarily stressful. You may be there may be certain more adverse things happening, say at the household or at home, because of, say, the stressors, of not being able to conform or having certain preferences, or certain sort of reactions, not all of which are in our control, but still, you know, people don't understand that and they may react in a way that is sort of negative, that may sort of make the situation worse. So in this example, you would see that somebody who may be different from most, may experience more stress, right? So this is the idea that, if the world is not a very friendly place, if they are not open to um, diversity, if they can only see one right and one wrong, and you're always on the other side of that, then things are going to be more stressful. So your life experience, you know, is going to be very different. But does that mean that there is not a group where you can feel sort of accepted or understood, or you can feel that you have things in common, or you're sort of on the same page with things? Well, I think in the past, prior to all of this technology, it was, there was some serious limitations. Like if you are unlike most people, then the only way you're going to find the other people that are more like you is if you do some serious searching. And the tools, say 30 years ago, didn't really exist for that. I mean, there are some things you could do, but certainly the difference between now and then is that we have tons of tools now, that enable people to connect with one another. So really, the possibilities, are endless, and there are. It's not just people can get help, right? So we've seen families chip in. They especially with their children. They'll try to meet other parents, and who have children who may be more similar to their child or who may relate more easily. So families may help do this stuff. Professionals may help do this. If you're a self-advocate, you've probably been doing this for a long time. But these are different drivers, but there's no reason why, there can't be some combination of this. And uh, the CASY we would see this more as a hybrid type of system. Is that we do have a lot of self-advocates driving this, but we also there's a lot of support from our end and some from families. So we're trying to leverage the technology, to create a lot of more opportunities for people. And I should just go into some of the complexities of it. So as we're saying, things are never that easy, especially when you're dealing with human beings, and there's a sort of a diversity of people. Everyone has their own experiences, things that they like, things that they don't, things that might trigger them, things that may calm them. And the language becomes important, because this is something as we are becoming more and more in touch with, autism, and people who are autistic, we're hearing some of the things that they prefer and not prefer. So language, I think, is a big one. All right. So, this difference between autism and autistic communities. This can be a bit of a controversy. Because very long story. And we'll try to touch on some of that here. But really, the autism community, refers to anybody who has a sort of, it's probably the most inclusive definition, and that it's consists of, say, all stakeholders. So people who have some interest in autism. This has, I think, been applied very generously, very broadly. So this could be professionals, this can be parents, but as you can see here, that the area that's blue, even the stripe blue, this is what you might consider the autism community, is that you've got people without a diagnosis, say non-autistic people, but also can include autistic people, which is actually the orange circle. So this area here, the autism community, can include both autistic people and people without a diagnosis. All right, just repeated this. So this is an extremely diverse community. There's the focus tends to be very different, right? So a lot of times when we talk about the autism community, I think a lot of the, say, presentation or the context is in the context of some service or some profession, whether it be vocational, recreational, talking about services, talking about research. A lot of people sort of use the word autism community, and their intentions. People are generally trying to help out. I don't think anybody's trying to cause anyone else any harm. But I think where the issue comes up is that people may confuse autism community as the same as autistic, or that the autism community represents autistic people, and that's just not true. And a lot of times, what the autism community advocates for, or what they think is believed to be the right thing, is at odds with what the autistic community likes. So it's important to know that, because really the autism community, the opinions may or may not represent autistic people. And if you're trying to build something that helps autistic people, you just can't derive your information from the general autism community, because you just don't know what part of the community has that opinion. But also, it's like the people who you're trying to help most may not be well represented, in those opinions and in that community. So this is becoming an area of increased awareness over time, but something that we have to be definitely aware and sensitive to, if we're going to develop programs, or you're going to help people with a diagnosis of autism or autistic community become have a better quality of life. Excuse me. So, example of this is the Daniel Jordan Fiddle Foundation. This was founded by a autism mom. It's primarily adult autism focused. They have people, both neurotypical people, mainly parents, and they have autistic adults involved in the foundation. But that would be one example of a community, of an autism community. There's other examples like ASRC, big autism community in Connecticut, which consists of autistic and non-autistic people. All right, now the autistic community is very much, that is, people know, this is known with more precision, right? So in a very simplified way, autistic community consists of autistic people. Seems pretty straightforward. Now, how these communities are, how these communities come to be, is very different. Like for instance, the autistic community, um, well, the autism community has been around forever, and ever since the description of autism, but the autistic community, is something that has been emerging, in a much more uh, significant way, say over the past like 15 years. I was even more than that, longer than that. But definitely a lot more traction in recent history when you compare it to sort of the general autism community. Um, and the roots of it have to do with disability rights. I think a lot of progress, which was made in the 1990s. But these groups tend to be definitely more based on advocacy, uh, but they can also be based on interest, and we can talk a little bit about that later. Uh, but here are some driving forces of the growing autistic community. Um, Here we have a graph on how often autism has been diagnosed over time. Which, as we've heard in the news, and other sources, just keeps on increasing more and more. Um, so and you can see by year, when the diagnoses are increasing. So say that you're diagnosed in 2004, and now we're into 2022. You are you're an adult now. And when you're an adult now, you have uh, a voice. You have a say so in things. You don't have to. You no longer have to sort of go with say what a parent thinks or what a parent wants you to do. You can sort of advocate for yourselves. And part of the advocacy, understandably so, was against some of these um, negative stereotypes, that are being connected to autism. Uh, I remember back, it wasn't that long ago, like 10 years ago, you would Google the word autism, and uh, the images that came up, often weren't positive images. So this is almost like sort of an informal uh, experiment of sort of what was sort of the public perception, of autism, and a lot of it was not a positive thing. And if it was a positive thing, then it was a very narrow description or a narrow uh, representation of one person with autism. So many of you have heard the Stephen Shore quote, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and that has always been the case, but not always obvious, for the general population or even the greater autism community. So advocacy, came to be very important, because uh, this was your future if you're an autistic adult, and there's a lot of misinformation going on out there. I think there was even an ad campaign that was um, portraying autism like it was some kind of a sort of disease, that would harm or children and families, and uh, one of the advocacy organizations came up and petitioned against it and got those ads removed. So, and that was really, really great evidence that if people were working together around a common cause, then we can actually get a lot of things done. So, driving forces, definitely, you have more identification, you have a lot of social issues that, were becoming at the forefront, but also going on at the same time is, you're seeing this rapid escalation of sort of online interaction and social media. So if you were able to say you didn't like going to groups, there weren't that many people around you that were like you or that you felt you could relate to, you had this whole online universe, which you could connect with other like-minded people, and you can talk about similar things, things that you have similar values. You can sort of work these things out. You can organize, you can plan, and you can get some great support, from people you trust, but it's not going to be in person. May not be in person, but doesn't mean that it's any less. I'm going to say no. That's one thing about our relationships is that we may have most of our human history has been based on in-person relationships, but doesn't mean that it has to stay in person. There's so much that we can do if we use the tools that we've developed. All right, this is possible subgroupings of autistic communities. So, we've got some communities that are based on interests. I think these have been around for also a very long time. Role-playing games, people who are into gaming, animation, computers, cars. We actually have a little car club I'm going to tell you about a little bit later. But really what you're doing is that you have people who like to interact for the sake of interacting, right? But then you have people who like to interact because they like to share interests, so it ends up being a great way to interact with other people, if you feel that, especially if you feel there's nothing to talk about. I know a lot of people who don't like to talk about the weather. Well, you're not talking about the weather, you're talking about stuff you love. This can be led by autistic adults or other folks. Then you have more advocacy-based groups. These are people who are have a lot of passion, around ideologies, human rights, pride and identity. One thing I should add is that this community consists of very talented advocates and people who are very articulate and can speak their mind and do so in a way that is well understood by others. And this is probably one of the better examples, probably the best example is that you have the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. This is taken from their website. But this is literally a grassroots disability rights organization for the autistic community, really founded by autistics for autistics and sort of going strong to this date. All right, so this is always like to share this slide because, June is Autistic Pride Day. We have Autism, World Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month, or just World Autism Month in April. So autism is becoming more and more and more, people are becoming more aware, and really what we were wanting society to move in is more towards, the acceptance and sort of the pride portion of it, not just thinking about this as sort of a medical entity, but really celebrating, diversity. It really is an expression of our diversity, and we should treat it as such because it is something that has made, I think it's afforded human beings lots and lots of progress. So Autistic Pride Day has been going on for, I think, 15 years now. All right, and I think this is all driven by, this idea of neurodiversity, right? We certainly have heard of diversity in other forms, whether it be racial, ethnic. The world is getting better at sensitivity towards those things that are visibly or more obviously different. But I think the next stage in appreciating our diversity as human beings is along the lines of really appreciating diversities that we cannot see, that aren't immediately obvious, right? That, some people may maybe attribute to mental health condition, but not necessarily so. All of these things, certainly I think in different degrees, they can become challenging, potentially problematic for someone's quality of life, but they all really are all expressions of our neurodiversity. All right. So um, now this is something that has also been coming up more and more. So I spoke about the differences between the autism and autistic communities, uh, and how they don't always see eye to eye. And it's something that we have to be acutely aware of because we never want to make assumptions, especially if we're trying to help people. you know it's really our responsibility to really know the people we're trying to help as much as possible, or the people we're trying to support. We want to understand them as much as possible, so that we don't end up having the opposite effect. um, and I think this is played out in families. You can see this article here. Interesting piece that sort of encapsulates the situation at hand is that you know parents and of autistic men and women don't always sort of agree, and they have sort of maybe strong opinions of what their child needs, or many cases their adult son or daughter. And the adult son or daughter may have never agreed with that, may have never liked that, and still continues to have strong opinions against it. You know, so because of that, there can be a lot of disagreement between uh, the two groups. And since these are very pressing, sort of can be emotionally challenging topics, uh, it's not uncommon that sometimes these conversations become a bit intense, and potentially hostile. So uh, I think that really the solution is that um, you really have to, a lot of times, especially as say a parent or professional, you may be used to the role of sort of knowing what's best for somebody, or thinking what's best for somebody despite what somebody is telling you. Uh, and that may be true sometimes, but it's not always true. So always, and the person, say that you're used to making decisions for, there may have been a time in their lives where they were less able to make those decisions on their own, or think through pros and cons of uh, an intervention or whatever decision you're making, uh, having a hard time thinking about pros and cons that affect their quality of life. Right. But you know, as we've been saying throughout, change has really been the common denominator here. So those things that you may have made decisions for somebody, you may have been sort of made the right decisions for most of someone's life because they were minors and maybe they didn't have the sort of life experience, or the abilities to sort of think through things and project into the future. But that may not be the case, if the person's now an adult, and they've got sort of they formed their own idea of who they are and their own ideas of what's right and wrong, uh, which may be against, or um, in contrast to what a parent might think. You know, uh, and so you can get these disagreements, and I think it's really important that really people take time to understand, the other side. And not just sitting there listening passively, but really sort of understanding, from a conceptual way, and through all the details of why somebody has a certain opinion, or why someone's advocating for something, and rather, I think the initial reaction is to jump to a conclusion, to put in, to sort of shift into parent mode or shift into professional mode, and then try to, you know, with the best intentions, you're trying to have somebody agree with what you're saying, because you have the best intentions. But, you know, is your intention, could your intention be better served, you know, if you had more information about what the other person's thinking, you know? So communication ends up being, I think, paramount for uh, for these interactions. And I think that really is a step, that is the pathway forward, is to have deeper understanding, and then once you take the time to fully understand somebody, then they may in turn do the same thing for you. And they may be sort of influenced to also hear your perspective. And when people are talking like that, then they're able to sort of have come to some kind of a common agreement. All right, so so we've gotten a lot over the past couple of years during the pandemic. We have gotten a lot of feedback from mainly our autistic adults who are members. So we've sort of rolled out a next generation of groups. Uh, it's more of I would say it's more of sort of a reverse model of what we had before. Is that before we were thinking about, you would have people come in, meet in person, and then through those in-person meetings, they may connect outside, maybe they'll connect online. But this next generation of groups kind of takes a different approach. The emphasis of these groups, I mean, there's still social recreation. We still have the happy hours, but with an online program, a lot of it ends up being discussion based, right, or based on interactions via video conference. So we have a gaming group, we have a happy hour group. Those are sort of the fun groups. But really, what we want to have are groups that really develop the notion of awareness, acceptance, and pride. So a lot of our programs now are really keep this at the forefront. So we certainly have we're very open about this being a borderless community. And we want people to understand that, or want people to try this approach, where you can have a combination. I mean, right now it's completely virtual, but you can have, there's no reason why you cannot have both, right? So you can have in person and you can have virtual. You can have some combination of them. But what the groups are about now is that we want people who who've demonstrated that have figured out the community, the CASY Sparks community, right? And they know that these members are a good fit for them, through the various meetings that we have, whether they are based in social recreation or more education. Consistently, the same people show up, and eventually what's going to happen is that you're going to have enough people who are showing up who are local, and then those people may decide to get together in person, and when they get together in person, it doesn't mean that they have to exclude the people who are remote. They can include them virtually, right? So it is this sort of hybrid, a combination of things where people are they're using the online Zoom part to really break the ice, to really build those connections, in a way that is less stressful for them. But really, it's not for. I mean, it could be also to help the in-person gatherings. So now, when you're meeting in person, there's less anxiety. You already know who you're interacting with. So you may feel more inclined to loosen up, talk more, feel free to be yourself. It becomes, I believe, a more positive experience. Also listening to our members, a lot of issues or information needed on relationships. A lot of folks looking for friendships, something more than that. So we actually have a group dedicated to discussing that. And these are, I should sort of say this and make this very clear up front, that these aren't groups where we're talking at people. This isn't a lecture. This is more of a discussion group. So the idea here is to sort of help people find out for themselves what is the best path moving forward, and that's through knowledge of other people, knowledge of people leading the group like myself, but really ends up being people learning how to better help themselves, on these challenging topics. There's also a funny ad here on our cognitive distortion group. This is stinking thinking. So this is sort of common errors that we make in our thought processes that often make our lives more stressful and perhaps more stressful for those around them. So we mainly talk about cognitive distortions. So people who are familiar with CBT will know what cognitive distortions are about. These are sort of often errors we have in our thought process and perceptions, like sort of black and white thinking, overgeneralization. These are sort of things that we happen, we don't notice them, and then they end up causing some issues. So this group is specific to addressing people's experiences with that, and how we can make things a little bit better. This is a group we recently launched this year about autism. Very broadly. So the new wisdom, in my opinion, is that the people who think they know the most about autism, may be the folks who know the least about it. So and that's because I think most people will agree that it's extraordinarily not straightforward. Everybody's an individual, and there's so many different manifestations. So many different ways that autism can look in the community. So what this group is about is exploring all those different ways. And usually from people's own experience. And now we've actually have a guest host, Jenna, who is autistic adult, and she's also helping to lead this group, sharing her perspectives about being an adult, being an autistic adult. So we're trying to combine multiple perspectives here. We want people to see as many manifestations of the word. What does it look like? Because by and far, what most people see is what's on the movie screen, or what's streaming from your computer. Those are very, very narrow representations of autism. There's so much depth and richness in this, that I don't think that any textbook will ever do this justice. So the way you learn about this is you get to know the people as much as possible. And that's how you gain the best appreciation. All right. So I should mention that this is a member-led group. So part of our shifting role is to provide support infrastructure for people who do want to lead their own groups. For people who do have something they're interested in, that they want to talk about, whether it's because it's a hobby of theirs or because they feel very strongly and passionate about it. We want them to express that passion in the most productive way. So CASY Sparks really is trying hard to provide a robust platform, for some of our autistic adults to share their ideas and share their experiences, and then also unite people who have a similar interest as them. So this disability group is one great example of this. Is we have somebody, autistic adult, who is giving this presentation like every week, and I probably learned more on her sessions than I have in sort of the textbooks, that I've read in medical school. So this is the stuff that I don't think you're going to get in the books. This is the stuff that you learn, from participating in life. So, anyways, these groups are. Let's see, this group is once a week. The other group is every other week, They're all on the CASY Sparks meetup page, which there'll be a link at the end here. All right, so um, what we're finding is now that we have a lot of these different offerings, we're starting to look at where our members are coming from, and more what we're seeing is that there is certainly still from Connecticut, but with the new virtual approach, they are really coming from all over the place. And I should add that remember, these are the zip codes of CASY Sparks members on the meetup page. And this is actually from 2 years ago. So, 2 years ago, I think we've grown like several hundred members since then. So if this is what it's like 2 years ago, I would think that it's probably more spread out now. I'll tell you for sure, there's folks that we have who are attending these meetings from Canada, UK, even South America. And it's been very fulfilling because you also see some of learn some of the more cultural aspects of autism. Now, in trying to offer more things, for our very diverse membership group, we've been trying some special interest groups on Facebook. This group, this American Autism and Auto Club, certainly based on a personal interest of mine, but I love it because, this was always something separate, since I was a kid, I loved cars, but I never thought that how these things would be able to be combined with one another until I started this group. And you'll see that's grown to about 700 plus members. But the members they really are a diverse bunch. You have a lot of parents, of course, and you got some professionals, but you got some autistic adults, and we all have our different love of automobiles, and it's fascinating, and it's really just heartwarming to see that the diversity of expression here, of how people love their cars differently, the preferences that they have. Some of them are very much into outward displays of autistic pride or acceptance. There are folks who are a little more subtle about that, but they all connect around automobiles. And this has been a really great learning experience, and we're probably going to be doing some kind of a car show soon, probably doing a virtual car show at first, but opening up maybe over the summer to having something in person. All right, and in addition to Meetup, we have this Facebook group called Social Connectivity for Autism. This has been, I think we started this in the beginning of the pandemic. This is more of an alternative for people who didn't know how to use Meetup or not that interested in learning how to use Meetup. We post a lot of the events here as well, so you don't have to be a member of Meetup, which is also free, to access the links to the events. We will also post them here for people who are more familiar with Facebook. So this is a private group. Now, so far, it's been really a way of sharing when events happen or the sort of things that we're doing here in the group. But what we're going to be looking at in the very near future is having a more interactive component to this group. So have more dialogue. Take a more supportive role. So it's not so much us delivering news or updates. But it's people who want direct interaction. Via say the conversation threads. These groups can be a very huge support. This particular group consists of a very diverse bunch of folks. So same demographic as the CASY Sparks groups. So we've got people who are, parents, professional, autistic adults, but we really want another way for people to be able to connect with one another other than Zoom, because we understand that not everybody likes Zoom, and I know some people who are pretty open that they'll never use Zoom. So we want to offer another alternative for people who may shy away from the video conferencing. And we think that this may be a potential, but there's with most things, there's complexities that we have to work out. All right, so we're just about done here, but I like to end with this slide, and I know that I'm advocating very strongly for the use of technology, but I also want to make it very clear that as powerful as technology can be, it can also be hurtful and harmful, and I don't think there's any shortage of news about people who have had the negative effects of too much online connection. So I can't stress that we have to be very vigilant, and mindful when we're using technology to connect. We always have to make sure that technology is our tool. We are using the technology on our terms, in a way that we want, that assures that we get what we want in a safe way, right? But we never want to dominate our lives or feel that it is controlling us, or that we're doing things, because technology is making us do them. I think that's when we get sort of into the danger zone. And also, the idea that online interactions are great, but I don't think that they are supplemental. I don't think that they are. We're going to be in sort of a Matrix movie 10 years from now. I think that we have a lot of tools at our disposal. We need to maximize the use of those tools. And each person has maybe a different combination that they can use in that toolbox, to get the most out of living a fulfilling life.